With the NFC North being the tightest division, which team separated themselves the most after the 2025 NFL Draft? Stay tuned to find out which we picked as the best draft out of all four teams. Moving on to the NFC North, let's start with the Detroit Lions. Ryan, what grade would you give to the Lions for their 2025 draft class?
I gave it a B, Joe. I like the class overall. I especially like Tyreek Williams there in the first round, the big physical interior defensive lineman out of Ohio State. I think that he really fits what this team needs, right? Working next to a Lee McNeil, unlocking some things for Aiden Hutchinson, Jack Campbell running behind him. I really love that pick. After that, though, it got a little bit just fine for me. Like, there was just no super excitement. I do love the Dan Jackson pick from Georgia in the 7th round because Dan Jackson and Dan Campbell are like the exact, like if I had to envision a Dan Campbell safety, it would be Dan Jackson. Like that is the player that ultimately fits his style and just kind of his ideology. But outside of that first selection with Williams, outside of the Dan Jackson pick, and Tate Ratledge was a fine pick for where he was selected, but like outside of those three, nothing really just popped to me. Like I didn't really just get overly excited. I thought it was a very solid draft, but I thought it was also an unspectacular one as well.
Yeah, for me, this was a B-. Tyreek Williams, great pick for what they needed to bolster the interior of their defensive line. He's a big body. He's got some upside as a pass rusher. Tate Ratledge is a potential immediately starting guard for you. He was banged up this past year, so his performance was not really reflective of how good he could be. He was somebody coming into the 2025 season I had a late first-round grade on. But I got to be honest, I hated the fact that they traded up for Isaac Tisla. I thought that this was a bad move. You wasted draft capital to go up and get a guy who probably would have been available later on, and they also passed up on other better options at receiver where they took Tisla. He's a good athlete. He's a guy who rose the ranks as a D2 receiver up to Arkansas, but I don't really feel like this is a player who's going to be highly impactful that was so worth you moving up to go get him. The rest of these guys are backups, though, for the most part. There's not a lot of starting value that was found here in a draft class that had a lot of depth to potentially find those starters. Let's move to the Minnesota Vikings, who are looking to take J.J. McCarthy and turn him into a dynamic quarterback and put enough pieces around them in order for them to actually win the NFC North this year. How would you grade the Minnesota Vikings?
I would also give him a B. I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record. I don't hate the class. Again, I think Donovan Jackson, plug-and-play guard. You now have one of your best offensive lines that you've had in Minnesota in a very long time with Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill and Will Fries. And it's a very good offensive line. I think he's the last piece, potentially. Ty Felton, I think, is a good selection there at 102. Like, I'm cool with that as the speedster out of Maryland, but I really just thought that maybe there was another position or two that maybe should have been prioritized comparative to a wide receiver spot. And then overall, what knocks them down a couple picks for me is you only have 5 selections overall. Yeah. So that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a bad thing because obviously you've used draft capital in other areas. So it doesn't mean that a draft's bad because they have less selections, but you ultimately, in a grading perspective, you have less swings at the bat ultimately for really having a strong draft from a grade perspective. So I liked it. I think you got a couple high floor football players, but it didn't necessarily just come up. It was not a winner as far as some of these other teams and how they performed.
Yeah, they're a B for me as well, and I think that because of how they were handicapped by having so few selections, but I thought that they accomplished what they needed to with this very finite number of picks that they had. The one that they needed to hit out of the park was that first pick, and there was a lot of speculation if they were going to go corner early, if they were going to go defensive tackle. A lot of people were wondering who they were going to take in that first round, and I liked the pick of Donovan Jackson. You're trying to set up J.J. McCarthy with everything possible to succeed, and their offensive line rebolstering has been so impactful for what they can do this upcoming year. That to me is like the big push here. Donovan Jackson might not be your typical first-round pick. He might not be a super high ceiling guard, but he brings a floor. He brings steadiness. He also brings versatility to play multiple other positions. But the rest of these guys, rotational backup level players. Ty Felton probably not going to really crack that starting rotation of receivers because of how dense that group is, but he's got plenty of athleticism that he could be a really good fourth receiver on this team. So it's a B. They didn't have enough picks to really hit a home run here, but they laid down a nice bunt. They got on first base, and now they can set up this team that did a lot last season to carry that momentum into this upcoming year. Green Bay Packers, how would you grade the Green Bay Packers draft.
This is going to be my hot take, maybe of our grading process
Uh-oh.
here. I liked this draft. I did. I think I liked it more than some people did. I've seen some people on the universe that are giving this like C pluses and stuff, and I think this is a B plus draft in my opinion. And here's why. First and foremost, I'm not the biggest Matthew Golden fan of all time, but I think at 23, I am okay with it because I think he brings a dynamic that you don't have enough of on that roster. I know his body type is smaller. There's going to be some people talking about thresholds in the comments for the Green Bay Packers wide receiver and whether he's going to be able to play anything other than slot. And that's fine. I understand it. Outside of that, though, like Savion Williams, I think is an impressive weapon there at number 87 overall. I like the Barrett Sorrell pick. I like Warren. Here's my biggest surprise of the draft. If I have to predict a guy that's going to play a lot better than his draft slot, I bet you that we're going to look back in this class and Warren Brinson's going to end up being a good rotational player, if not a low-end starter. And we're going to say you got him at 198th overall. So I think the depth of this class, there was a bunch of picks that I really just generally liked. I think that I was higher on the Green Bay Packers draft than a lot of people were.
I can't agree with you on this. I'm going to go with B minus. And look, this is one Packers fans that I think I'm going to get proven wrong on because the coaching staff, the front office, they've shown creativity in getting production out of a lot of their different guys. And they've always bet on traits. Jordan Love is the definition of that. They bet on the traits. He's panned out to be a very high upside starter. Golden is a little confusing to me for where they took him in the first round because it feels like the whole receiver room is all second receiving options. And my whole thing with Matthew Golden is that he's a second receiving option. He's not going to step in and be your number one target. He plays off of whoever that primary target is, and he's going to win on the outside with his route running, with his speed, with his hands. He's able to make some difficult catches. I just feel like there's a lot of similar body types to Matthew Golden already in that receiver room. I love the Savion Williams pick because he could probably play some running back for you. You can motion him out in the slot. Like you could just have some fun and goof around with him. And I think that LaFleur is going to be creative in doing so many different things. The rest of this class is fine, though. Like Anthony Belton's an underrated player who I really liked where they took him in the second round with not a lot of good offensive line options. I think that he could eventually crack that starting lineup when you needed a little bit more juice in your offensive line. The rest of the class is fine, though. It's okay. I don't know if any of these players are anything more than rotational or depth pieces, which I guess the Packers just needed some sort of depth in order to prepare themselves to fight to win the NFC North this year. Let's round out with the Chicago Bears, who were a controversial one. How would you grade the Chicago Bears?
This makes me feel like such a bad person because I love the Luther Burden pick at pick 39, but I didn't like this draft, Joe. I did not like this draft. This was a C plus to me. I was not a big fan of the Bears draft. Loveland at 10 was just too high. Ozzie Trapillo at 56 was just too high. Ruben Hippolyte, number 132 overall, a priority free agent level player. Luke Newman, not a very good player as well, drafted in the 6th round. There was a lot of reaches in this draft, and there were a couple head scratchers for me. I like a couple of the guys that were selected, but overall, this one left me just kind of confused, to be honest.
I'm going to take a B minus here. The weapons that they got on offense, the players that they got on offense, I like. I like Ozzie Trapillo a little bit more than you like him. I really like Shamar Turner, and I think that he could be a starting defensive tackle for you that they got in the end of the 3rd round. And I think that he is a lot of explosiveness, doesn't get talked about much because Shamar Stewart was the one driving the conversation. But as you said, Hippolyte was a huge reach because he was a pro day warrior and nobody was talking about him outside of that. Zoff Frazier is a good athlete. I love Kamanungai. I will say this. Kamanungai could end up becoming, and I've said this a million times over, this was the circumstance for him to land to become this year's Bucky Irving, this year's Kyron Williams, earn some carries, earn some touches, ground things out in the short area, and then start to become that starting running back for your team because he just does everything right. Fantastic in blitz pickup. The last 2 thoughts here before we close out. Colston Loveland was the right pick. I've come around on this. He was the right pick for which tight end to take. Tyler Warren was the better tight end, but you already had Cole Kmet, who was an inline player. It made more sense to go with somebody who's more of a space player who you can line up in the slot, who you can attack downfield with. Lastly, Luther Burden is going to be really dominant in the slot. I think that there's a capability for them to really seriously air things out with the way that this offense is structured. Folks, hit that like button and subscribe subscribe, comment below what you think of our grades on this year's draft, and we'll talk to you later.